When I was a little girl, Easter was a big deal. It meant new dresses and new hats. I think it was the only day that I ever wore a fancy hat that was Easter. It was a kind of hat, that had, for all you ones that were little girls, the elastics that were really uncomfortable, that pinched your skin underneath your chin. And then it had a ribbon that hung down your back, and if you were lucky, you got a flower or two. I also had to have my hair put in curlers the night before, so I had curly hair to wear under my new hat. My mom would line me and my two sisters up on the sidewalk in front of our house and take our picture in all of our fancy Easter clothes and then take us to church. I remember more about my clothes than I do about the church. I'm not sure when I started to associate Easter with Jesus and resurrection. I do know that for a lot of years it was about the bunny and the chocolate. Do you know all about the bunny and the chocolate? Yes. At some point, though, in my growing up, Easter became a church moment. And I began to understand that the baby in a manger was also the man on a cross in a tomb. But it was probably a full few years after that that I finally began to understand what Easter was really about. And I think I probably should qualify that with saying I'm not even sure I completely understand still what Easter is all about. In my time as minister, I've preached on this 25 times at least, over 25 times, and if you count the Easter sunrise service, it's double that. I have, but each and every time I sit down to write my Easter sermon, I struggle. I struggle because it's hard stuff. It's a great story. It's thought-provoking theology, but it's challenging to talk about Easter in a different way each time we come around to it. It's also tough to wrap my head around it because this is the story. This is the story that we as Christians hinge our faith on. And there's something about this story that words don't adequately meet it. I would love to be able to say some magic incantation that would take the Easter moment that those disciples first felt and put it into your hearts and minds this morning and plant it deep down so that you carry it around with you all day and you feel all Eastery. But I left my magic wand at home and I don't have the words for it because the words are inadequate. One year I was convinced that the people wanted to hear that jarring realization of resurrection, that jolt of discovery that the women and the disciples felt when they knew that Jesus was dead because they watched it, and then when they realized that the resurrection had happened. So I used the term, the slap up the side of the head, multiple times in the Easter sermon. That went over like a lead balloon. I remember looking out into the congregation and realized that the puzzling looks they were giving me meant my words were not landing. It was one of those sermons when the poor people of Tara probably thought I was losing it. Because we bring a lot of expectations to this moment. The story that we read in the Gospel of John this morning stretches the limits of our rational thought. Stones rolled away, discarded grave clothes, angels offering strange explanations, the idea that a person could die and then not be dead, that God is way bigger than death, that God in Jesus is way more alive and transformed and resurrected than we can ever experience or dream. It's hard to wrap our 21st century scientific, logical minds around it all. Ever since that Tara experience, I try not to find words to try and force an understanding with what went on down in that tomb and what the guy in the garden looked like to Mary. And I realize that there are no words. I have an inadequate vocabulary, an insufficient imagination to explain Easter. I don't know how it happened. I don't know in what form Jesus arose, what he looked like when he first appeared to the witnesses. Some people are certain of these things and have explanations for them, but I don't. But I do know that something happened that morning by the tomb. Given that we are here, 2,000 years later, still listening to that story, still wondering about what happened, still trying to grasp this Easter moment. Something happened. Something amazing and momentous happened that morning. But just because I can't explain it doesn't mean it didn't happen. There are lots of things in the world that I can't explain, that I don't understand, but that doesn't make them any less real. So here's the story as told by John. It's been a day and a half since Jesus was buried. Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb. We're not really sure why Mary goes to the tomb. It could be that she's going to anoint a body with spices for burial, as that was the custom in her time. She may, however, just have come to this place because it was here that she could feel close to Jesus, who was her friend, who had just died. I can imagine she's carrying tons of grief. The shock, the despair. It was only a week ago when they had come to Jerusalem. I don't think any of them could have imagined what would come after that Palm Sunday parade that they had just been through. An arrest, a trial, a crucifixion, a death, so fast, so fast. Shock, sorrow, grief, disbelief are probably some of the things that Mary is feeling that first Easter morning. And it was dark. Dark outside, dark inside. Violence and fear hangs like a cloud over her. Where just a little while ago, everything seemed so alive and free as she followed Jesus around the countryside and heard his teaching and his preaching and witnessed the palms coming into Jerusalem. Mary's life had changed so dramatically since she first met Jesus. And now Jesus has been taken from her, executed on a cross. And he died while she stood at the foot of the cross. It is dark and lonely and awful that morning as she goes to that tomb to be with Jesus' body. And then when she found that stone rolled away, her grief is replaced with fear and shock and anger and disbelief that anyone could desecrate the final resting place of her friend. So she runs and she tells the others what she saw, and Peter and the unnamed disciple run to the tomb to see for themselves. The one who is unnamed goes to the entrance but does not go in. The other, Peter, goes in and sees the grave cloths all rolled up and put aside, and then they leave. But Mary stays. Mary stays with tears in her eyes and leans into the tomb, and she sees what Peter and the other disciple did not, that there are two angels, two people in white, who ask her, "Why are you crying?" "They have taken away my friend, and I do not know where they have put him." Because not only has he died, but now his body is gone. And then as she turns around, she sees another whom she thinks might possibly be the gardener, and again she is asked, why is she weeping? If this was me, I'd be pretty frustrated by now. All these men asking, why am I crying? She just lost her beloved. She's grieving. Of course she is crying. So when she's asked yet again, why is she crying? She demands that this man tell her where they have taken the body. To which he says, Mary. He calls her by name. And in that moment, that's Mary's resurrection moment. Everything changes. All is transformed. Her world has just shifted into a new thing. And then he says, do not hold on to me. Let go of what you're holding on to. This is resurrection, letting go of what we hold on to, what holds us back, what we entomb, our anger, our hate, our blame, our shame, letting go of resentment and prejudice and judgment and narrow-mindedness, letting go of grief and sorrow and anything that keeps us from moving on to whatever is next for us. Letting go is resurrection, and letting go is new life. And so then Mary goes and tells the others what she has seen and heard. She goes and shares her resurrection experience. And here we are this morning, one more time, and in the midst of sharing this resurrection experience, may we be blessed with a resurrection of our own, where new life comes to us. Because this is what Easter is. Letting go in the midst of death and endings and new life. Death, endings. Whether we're ready or not, Easter comes. The stone is rolled away. The tomb is empty. The grave clothes litter the ground, and God does the impossible. Resurrection. The ending was actually a beginning. The darkness was permeated with light. Life emerged out of death, and the empty tomb is overflowing with hope and joy and love and anticipation and relief and optimism and release and fulfillment and blessing after blessing after blessing after blessing. This is Easter. This is resurrection. This is God getting into the world. This is new life. Happy Easter, everyone. Amen.